Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, How to Talk About Environmental Safety in Prenatal Education Classes. My name is Louise, and I'm with the Best Start Resource Center. I would like to start with a land acknowledgement to acknowledge the Indigenous people who've been living and working on the lands across Canada for thousands of years, including the land where you're watching this webinar from today. The Health Nexus office in Toronto is located on the historical territory of the Wendat, Petun, Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work in this territory. So we have participants from Ontario, Quebec, Newfoundland, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Alberta, New Brunswick, and the United States. And we have two awesome presenters, Erica Phipps and Lynn Soramaki. And we do have their biography here. Erica Phipps is the executive director of CPCHE, and she has been very, very helpful to a lot of work we've done with the Best Start Resource Center, and she's currently doing her PhD in health promotion. She will be the main presenter for the English session you're receiving today. Lynn Soramaki is a public health nurse at the Thunder Bay Thunder Bay District Health Unit, and she's also been very helpful to do a lot of the work, to support a lot of the work done by the Best Start Resource Center. So just out of interest, we would like to know who is here. So we'll do a short poll on the sectors. So if you could just click on the circle where that represents where you work or where you provide prenatal education, because sometimes people may have a couple of hats and it might be of interest for everyone to know. So as we can see, we've got a very strong representation from public health on this call. So we'll leave the poll open for another few seconds here while people settle in. And for those of you who are just coming in, I did encourage everyone to try to identify their full name and organization when they sign in. And you can do that by going to the attendees pod. And at the very right, you will see some little horizontal line. If you click on that, it'll say edit my info, and if you could add the name of your organization and how many people are on the line, that would be very helpful. So we seem to have a high representation from public health, a little bit from the CPNP programs, a little bit from Healthy Baby, Healthy Children, and some private prenatal educators, and some people who teach prenatal education in college and education setting. So thank you very much. And now I will go back to the PowerPoint presentation, and we will give Erica Phipps the microphone. Thank you, so that she can present her information. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks, everybody, for your participation today. I'm looking forward to spending the next hour or so talking with you about environmental health and messaging in prenatal education. So I am, as Louise mentioned, I'm working with CPCHE, the Canadian Partnership for Children's Health and Environment. And for those of you who may not be familiar, I thought I would just give you a brief overview. So CPCHE is an affiliation of organizations that have been working together for almost 20 years with diverse expertise in the areas of public health, clinical health, environmental protection, child care, law, and policy. And you see here the core CPCHE partners and some of our affiliates as well. So today what I hope to do is we'll start out with giving you a brief overview of Best Start's prenatal key messages, and then we'll move into the discussion of, first off, why do we care about these issues, and then a discussion and hopefully interaction about the how. How do we make this information accessible and relevant to people as they're anticipating arrival of their newborn babies. Throughout, we'll be providing some ideas on useful resources, drawing largely on CPCHE, but some additional resources as well. And at the end, we hope to have ample time for your questions and ideas and discussion. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Louise, just to orient people to Best Start's excellent prenatal education messaging. And I believe you're going to give folks just a quick window into the website and how to navigate that resource.
Yes, thank you very much. And oh, beautiful picture, but that's not what I was hoping to see. This is what I was hoping to see. Thank you. So hopefully most of you are familiar with the Prenatal Education Key Messages that were developed a couple of years ago, but just in case some people aren't, in 2015 we developed this website that has all the key information and consistent key messages that everyone who is working with pregnant people should be giving out. And there are 25 topics altogether. And today, of course, we will be focusing more on safety during pregnancy, which is this one. And for all key messages, all topics rather, there's a section that has the key messages, which is really the information you want to get across to parents. What it has the key, that's the main information, and then a little bit more details for them. So this is the key message here. And then we have the supporting evidence, which is more intended for service provider so that they would know why did they say that and what. So for instance, let's say on plastics, if you go down, you've got more details, and then there's a number that represents the reference where this was found, and you have all the references here if you want to find out more. And you also have some resources and links that may be useful, and websites you can find out more information, prenatal education provider tools, some client handouts, videos, apps that are also available. And in some cases, such as this one, there are appendices, and you will go over this chart actually with Erica a little later. Now, if we go back to the home page where all the 25 topics were listed, you'll also notice something called Register for Updates. And we do encourage you to register. And then if we do update a key message, you will get the information. You will get an email. Not every single time it's done, but when there's a group of information that needs to go out, then we every 3 months or so we say, okay, we've updated these key messages. So you can fill out a mini survey actually, which basically asks for your name, organization, and sector you're in. And something else that might be of interest, all the key messages are available in a PDF format, so you can just download that and send that to your clients as is, or provide them during prenatal classes, and it has all the key information that they may need. I will go back to the main screen, the main presentation screen, and I also want to point out, and I meant to do that at the very beginning, but at the bottom you'll see a number of files, and you can download them and have them in PDF format. They complement this presentation. You'll see some that have FR, that's because they're the French version, some EN, if there's an English and a French, and if you have, there are a few that are only available in English, so you're welcome to upload the files. And I will be putting a couple more links in the chat box on the right-hand side, so you may want to keep an eye on that too. So that's it for me. I'll give the microphone back to Erica now. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Louise. Can everybody hear me okay? Louise, is the sound okay?
I would think a little louder would be good, if possible.
Okay.
But it might just be
right,
me, but a little louder. Thank you.
I will attempt to increase the volume a little bit. So thank you very much for that tour of the site, Louise. I think it's really helpful to have all of that information and such a nice collection. As Louise mentioned, today we're focusing on the key messages related to environmental health and safety in pregnancy, and reflecting my expertise and experience, and also that of Lynn, our other presenter. We're going to focus more on the toxics issues. There are some areas that you will also want to take a look at that we're not going to spend time on today, such as the safety tips for travel, air travel, and seatbelt use, and all that sort of stuff. But just to say that those resources are available there with the references and handouts and so forth. So moving on into the why section. So as backdrop, when we're working on these issues, it's helpful to know something about the science that's motivating us to want to get this information into the hands of prospective parents. I think it's quite fair to say that we are at a moment of change in Canada. Certainly there's a growing public awareness and concern about products It used to be that everyone would assume that if you can buy it in a store, if it's on the shelf in Canada, somebody will have tested that to make sure it's absolutely safe for the developing fetus and child. We now, I think, have growing recognition that that's not always the case. We have emerging information about toxins and how they affect development and health, and not everything is fully checked vis-a-vis prenatal and childhood exposures and health risks. Alongside that, there's increasing concern among parents. Well, what do I do? How do I navigate this? How do I reduce the risks? What can I do for my family? Industry is starting to respond by changing the way they formulate products, by the way that they market things. I think you can't probably go into any store without coming across something that's labeled BPA-free or phthalate-free. This is a response to this growing public awareness about the role of toxic chemicals in our health. And also importantly, we see changing health trends. They call it the new childhood morbidities. So we're seeing roughly 1 in 4 children in Canada having some sort of developmental or learning or behavioral disorder. Some of the cancers in young adults are on the rise. Autism rates have, of course, increased tenfold, at least relying on U.S. data. The data in Canada is not as robust, but certainly something's going on that can't be explained by genetics alone. And increasingly, we're looking to those environmental exposures. There's strong evidence and always emerging evidence about how environmental exposures are linked to our health, and it's safe to say, I think, that they're affecting, have relevance for pretty much every bodily system, the respiratory system, our immune systems, the brain and nervous system, reproduction and child development, risk of cancer, and also the functioning of our endocrine systems. Again, it's always complex. There's multiple factors in any health outcome. The evidence is still emerging, but again, the stakes are high, so we are looking to how can we safeguard our health as best as we can. There's growing evidence that these exposures to toxic chemicals, even at low levels, can have lifelong implications. So we're moving beyond a focus on just toxic acute poisonings, not that that's not a concern, but also thinking about how do we reduce those low-level chronic exposures, recognizing that low-dose exposures do matter, that there's a complex relationship between exposures and our genetic functioning, that the timing of exposure is important, and very critically that exposure prevention during pregnancy is the most key moment of opportunity for prevention. We now in Canada have multiple years of data in which toxic levels are measured in a sample of the Canadian population. There is no person in Canada or anywhere in the world that doesn't carry many different chemicals in their body, including a newborn baby. The levels tend to be highest in children, and this is because of their differential behavior patterns that cause greater exposures, but also in some cases their immature detoxification and metabolism, which means that those levels stay higher where they might be more quickly processed in an adult. We use, and this will be a concept familiar to many of you, the term windows of vulnerability to try to capture that idea that exposures at different times of fetal and child development can have different impacts. So timing is key. This is a chart that Louise has already referenced, just to give you sort of a pictorial display of what this means. So this is an illustration of teratogen showing how when exposure to that teratogen occurs at different points in gestation, you will have potential effects on different parts of the developing fetus. So the central nervous system vis-a-vis things like eyes and ears and so forth. And it is certainly the case that many contaminants cross the placenta. It is no longer believed. It used to be believed that the placenta was protective, but most of these substances can move into the placenta, and in fact, the levels in the womb tend to be higher than in the mother's blood. Another important facet to keep in mind, particularly when we're thinking about our educational strategies and tailoring that information to the families that we're working with, thinking that not every person, not every family, not every community is bearing the same vulnerability or the same exposures. This has to do with socioeconomic difference. Poverty is certainly increasing risk of both exposure and vulnerability to harm. So for example, if you're undernourished, low in calcium, for example, your uptake of lead will be greater. So there's both a double burden of increased exposure in low-income circumstances as well as often increased susceptibilities. Cultural differences as well. People who are eating a lot of fish in their diet may have higher mercury exposures. People eating country foods, many different cultural facets there as well, including some personal care products, parental occupation, and so forth. So certainly bearing in mind who you're working with, the communities that you're in, and how you may want to take some of this information and prioritize certain aspects and de-emphasize others in order to make it accessible and relevant. I'm just going to share with you two examples of particular concern, at least to my way of thinking. Toxins and the developing brain is an area that our partnership has focused on a lot. I think for obvious reasons. You only get one chance to develop your brain. We've got decades, if not centuries, of knowledge and evidence that lead and mercury are neurotoxic. They're harming the developing brain. But there's a number of other categories of chemicals that we're increasingly understanding linked to that brain function and that brain architecture early in life. So exposure to certain types of pesticides linked to symptoms of ADHD, prenatal BPA exposure, that's the plastic additive in hard plastics, again suggesting links there with behavioral changes, aggression and hyperactivity. And PBDEs, that's a type of flame retardant used in furnishings that no longer so widely used, but we have the legacy residue of PBDEs, exposures there prenatally associated with things like poor attention and fine motor skills, et cetera. So we're certainly starting to see the connection between what we have in our environments and what we're seeing in terms of our children's intellectual and neurological development. The second example, just wanted to underscore the emerging area of endocrine disrupting chemicals. And as we know, the hormones in our bodies play a pivotal role in orchestrating development of the fetus and child. So as we're exposed to substances that can interfere with that, either by mimicking or blocking the function of hormones, those chemicals can have wide-ranging, if subtle, subclinical effects on the developing fetus or child. So scientists are now even calling some of these chemicals obesogens because some of them have the ability to shift metabolism of sugar and fats in such a way that over the life course it's going to increase the risk of obesity. There are roughly 800 chemicals that are known or suspected to interfere with normal endocrine function, and most chemicals in use today have not been tested to assess their endocrine disrupting potential. So this is from a United Nations report, State of the Science on Endocrine Disrupting Chemicals 2012, in which they made this rather stark statement that endocrine disrupting chemicals have the capacity to interfere with tissue and organ development and function, and therefore may alter susceptibility to different types of disease throughout life. This is a global threat that needs to be resolved. So again, not to belabor the dire circumstances here, but just to underscore the importance of integrating the toxics prevention messaging into our work and also into our policy advocacy efforts to get better testing and regulation of substances that may or are known to be harmful during development in particular. So the key thing here and the focus of our task is to figure out ways that we can help people reduce exposures. I mean, the gold standard would be to have robust laws so that such chemicals are not allowed into the marketplace and do not end up in our homes and other environments. But the reality is that's where we're at today, that there are multiple chemicals that we're exposed to through various routes of exposure. So figuring out where these things are coming from, by and large, gives us some ideas of how we can start to reduce, to dial back some of those exposures. So again, data are often insufficient, but three major areas. So air, and particularly indoor air, but also outdoor air, with contaminants often settling into the dust that's in the home environment, and retraining. So you have inhalation, but you also have dust exposure through hand-to-mouth activity. Food, and this is multiple sources. So there may be pesticides residues, or it may be the packaging of the food. Consumer products, again, largely indoors, and many of the chemicals that are emitted from those products end up in that dust or in the indoor air. So those are some areas we have in the CPCHE partnership focused a lot on the home environment, largely because that's where pregnant moms and kids are spending a lot of time, but it is also a place where the exposure to those contaminants and consumer products and dust and food tend to be centered. So we're going to shift now to the how, but before we do so, Louise is going to run us through another poll question or two.
Yes, two poll questions, and that gives Erica a chance to catch her breath after this great introduction to the topic. So some people have already started answering. So to what extent do you integrate environmental health messages in your prenatal education teaching? So if you could just take a second to click on the bubble there on the circle that applies to you, that would be great. And I will repeat for participants who have not clearly identified themselves in the as a participant, if you did not type in your name and organization, you can do so now by going to the top of the attendees box, and to the right there's some horizontal lines. If you click on that, you'll be able to edit your information, which will be your name and full organization name. That saves a lot of work for our admin staff. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, Erica, before we move on to the next poll. So many people don't, majority don't talk about environmental health messages, and I'd be curious to know, and you can type it into the poll, the chat box at the bottom, but why is it that you don't integrate? Is it a lack of knowledge on the topic, or it'd be perhaps interesting to put your information in that chat box, why you don't integrate it?
Yes, thanks, Louise. And I'm not at all surprised to see that sort of one-third, one-third, one-third split. I think that is typical, and we are in a period of transition where increasingly prenatal educators and others who work frontline with families are trying to figure out how to incorporate this into routine practice. So, we are part of that shift, and it is encouraging to see that more than half are, at least some of the time, incorporating this into their work.
That's great, and I see the responses coming in. Yeah, limited time in prenatal classes, other topics take over, and that's it. Sometimes it brings up more questions that they may not have the expertise on, and that's where I'm hoping some of the key messages that are on the website, you can dig up some information as to the supporting evidence, so that might be helpful. Yeah, it sounds like, great topics to add. Yeah, I don't know if you want to comment a little further, so, Erica, and then we'll go to the next.
Well, maybe just to respond a little bit to the concerns about not having the expertise, and this is something that, of course, we hear. Even those of us who work in children's environmental health feel a lack of expertise because the volume of emerging science is so huge. But what I think we're going to try to encourage you to do as we talk about strategies for this is just think about simple ways, think about one step at a time, bearing in mind prevention, precaution. You don't have to have all the details, but if something feels like that has a strong smell, just try to steer away from those sorts of things, using kind of practical, everyday ways of just thinking, if in doubt, leave it out kind of approach, rather than necessarily, and I think this is what we've learned in our work, people don't necessarily want or need to know the the treacherous details of it's this chemical versus that chemical. They really just want to know what basic practices, what can I do as a matter of course in my day-to-day life that's going to help to dial back some of these exposures. So some of our top 5 tips were designed because that's the messaging we were hearing, and we'll get into that in a minute. So anyway, just to reassure that nobody's an expert, nobody ever feels like they're fully an expert, and leaning on the resources that have been put together is certainly one way to get beyond that hurdle.
And I see the response from Kim that maybe sometimes the clients don't put it as part of their needs, but that's it. Sometimes when you don't know it's a need, you don't identify it as a need, perhaps. And anyway, the next topic, the next poll is along the same lines, but what health topics on which you receive the most questions or interest from prospective parents, environmental health topics. So if you could respond to that poll, that would be of interest to us, and Erica might be able to comment on that and focus a little bit more information on that in her presentation too.
Yes, it is interesting. I mean, for sure, plastics and cleaning products, personal care products, and I think that's reflective of some progress in regulation. So for example, when BPA was banned from baby bottles, it was a very public story. People were tuned into that. Manufacturers have responded, so it's kind of become common language to be thinking about plastics and, which bottles do you choose, and all, or water bottles, or, shifting towards metal and glass. Those sorts of things are part now, I think, of our public consciousness. Some of the other things, not so much. Cleaning products, I mean, I think we've had a number of years now where people are talking about, how to use more simple, less toxic products. Some of the other things, they're more emergent. We've been doing a lot of work on radon, for example, and most people have still, I would say it's fair to say most people haven't heard about it, or if they have, they don't have a good knowledge about that. Interesting to see that lead is at 0. And maybe that's a success story. Lead is a topic that's been addressed in multiple ways, not to say that the problem has gone away. We still find, costume jewelry that's largely made out of lead that's coming in, mostly imported. So still need to be vigilant there. And of course, the legacy of lead paint, particularly in older homes where it may be chipping and ending up in the dust or ingested by kids. Anyway, so very interesting. Thank you for that poll. It gives us a good idea of what people are hearing about.
Thank you. And now we're back to the PowerPoint. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to get us started, and then I'll pass it over to Lynn to talk through some of what we've put together and ideas that we've tried in terms of the how to get these messages into people's hands in a way that is meaningful to them and accessible and something that they can act upon. So starting off, just again reflecting on the Best Start key messages, I think it's an excellent framework. Best Start has pulled together a nice crisp list of things. Here's some stuff we want to try to avoid: the plastics, toys, or other things with BPA or polyvinyl chloride, oil-based thinners and paints, lead from water pipes and old paint, harsh cleaning products, and pesticides. So it's a nice short tick list accompanied by ideas on safer alternatives. Again, you don't want to say avoid something unless you're able to offer what people can turn to instead. So glass or metal instead of plastic when it comes to food containers and so forth. Toys labeled as phthalate-free or PVC-free, not that that's a perfect solution, but it does get us going in the right direction. Low or zero VOC paint products, and then again the idea of using simple non-toxic household products instead of harsh cleaners that are purchased from the store, and it's often a lot cheaper to do it that way too. So a few resources that we've put together that may be helpful in this regard. These are plain language tip cards that accompany our top 5 tips. So the first one, get drastic with plastic, is really helpful for reinforcing that message about, switch to glass or metal, don't microwave in plastic, think about the role of heat in helping chemicals migrate from plastic into food, so you're not pouring hot things into a plastic dish or container. Those sorts of messages in a very simple format that you can just hand out to reinforce the education that you're doing. Another one similar, go green when you clean, tips on how to use baking soda instead of scouring powders, avoiding fragrances, mixing vinegar and water to use for cleaning surfaces and floors, again, avoiding the quote-unquote air fresheners. Again, some simple tips that people can literally have in their hand and walk away with. And then the third one that I just wanted to flag here based on those core key messages from Best Start is renovate right. And this is reinforcing the idea that renovations are really not the best idea during pregnancy. But if there is work being done either during preconception, pregnancy, or when kids are young, think about purchasing the low VOC. Don't scrape old paint because it probably has lead in it, and you'll be allowing the dust and particles from that to get into your living space. Air the place out as long as you can till all fumes are gone, and do a very, very careful job of cleaning up all the dust and residue. There are a couple of, so on those sorts of, those tips that are largely focused on the home, there are a couple that weren't on the list, but I do just want to briefly flag because we've been working within CPCHE to try to raise awareness around these two issues, which in our experience have been kind of under-recognized and underserved. Lots of Canadians don't know about these two things, so I just want to spend a quick moment. The first one is compact fluorescent light bulbs, the CFLs, the little pigtail ones. Each one of them contains a small amount of mercury. So this is, mercury again, it's a neurotoxic chemical. And what we're finding is that most people don't actually know proper protocol if one of those bulbs happens to break. So we've got a fact sheet. Health Canada also has information. But essentially, it's, I think most people's first instinct would be to run for the vacuum cleaner, and that's actually the last thing that you want to do. So in a nutshell, basically get all the kids and pets out, open the windows. Mercury volatilizes very quickly, so it's coming up into the air. You want to get air moving through that space. And then the cleanup, you do not vacuum or sweep. Instead, you're using bits of tape and collecting the broken glass and using tape to try to lift up off of the floor or the carpet the small bits of glass and any residue of mercury that might be there. And then also considering what you've gathered, the paper towels and the waste, sealing it in a glass jar or something, storing it outside until you can take it to the hazardous waste. So it reflects the importance of this issue. A very little bit of mercury is quite potent, so we want to make sure that mercury is not ending up in our homes. So some simple tips on what to do if a CFL breaks, and the key thing being don't run for the vacuum cleaner because the mercury will go into the vacuum cleaner and right out the other side and get up into the air, which is exactly the opposite of what you want to do. The second, I'd say, little-known topic that we're hoping to work alongside many others to raise awareness is radon. This is a radioactive soil gas. It comes from uranium and soil and rock, and it's everywhere in air, but when it comes in through the soil under your home and through cracks in the foundation or whatever, it can build up to harmful levels. It is the second leading cause of lung cancer in Canada, second only to smoking. And a very simple do-it-yourself test kit that costs $30 or $50 you can get from hardware stores or online will tell you if your levels of radon are of concern. Health Canada has terrific resources online about understanding your radon level and what to do if the levels are high. So if you have opportunities to help families understand about radon and encourage them to test their homes, that would be a great step forward. So now we're going to shift to the section of the Best Start prenatal education that's other tips. So, the first cluster was about products to avoid and what to replace them with. These are sort of other sort of practical day-to-day things. And again, a lot of parallel with the sorts of messaging that we've been promoting through the top 5 tips, things like busting the dust frequently, taking your shoes off at the door, using solvent-free dry cleaners, ventilating when renovation activities are happening, and then also at the end there, important to recognize that the air quality index is also important to keep an eye on, particularly during smog events or seasons of the year where that may be a concern. So again, just a few potentially useful resources here. The Bus That Does tip card that we've put together. The Air Quality Health Index has a website and an app. These are things that you can suggest to the families that you're working with. The next cluster of key messages from Best Start has to do with personal care products. Again, we saw in the poll that this comes up a lot. People are interested in this. They're thinking about, well, I'm putting these things on my body, on my skin. Is that going to be a concern? So maybe I'll just go back. So things like tanning products, nail polish, nail remover, hairspray, and hair dye, skin products that contain retinol, cosmetics, insect repellents, and then also natural health products. So a few things that we can offer here in terms of materials to support that messaging. Fragrances tend to be a cross-cutting thing. You're going to see it in a lot of personal care products, from shampoo to things like cologne or fragrances, and other products in the home too, as well as like laundry detergent and air fresheners. So this is a simple fact sheet that we've put together in English and French, and it describes why fragrances, the chemicals that they use in fragrances often contain phthalates, which is a known endocrine disruptor. Phthalates do not need to be listed on the label, so the word of advice is to look for the word fragrance or the French word parfum as an indication of that product may contain these chemicals that are harmful. So this is just some simple tips of how to reduce your exposure to fragrance products, and underscoring the message that clean doesn't actually need to have a smell. It can just be clean. Another category of personal care products is those that are labeled as antibacterial. This is a terrific campaign that Lynn and her colleagues at Thunder Bay District Health Unit did on antibacterial soaps and other products containing triclosan. Again, a chemical that's linked with endocrine disruption. There have also been a number of statements from the medical establishment raising concern about triclosan and other antibacterial chemicals contributing to antibiotic resistance, which, as you all probably well know, is a global concern. We're starting to reduce the effectiveness of our therapeutic drugs by overusing antibacterial and other antibiotic products. Also from Thunder Bay, a little wallet card on phthalates and your child's health, and one on more generally personal care products. So these are some things that can help support learning and help people remember what the concern was and how to make safer choices. And then this is the last section that of the prenatal education that we'll deal with today, and just very briefly to say that occupational health and safety is of course critical, encouraging families to talk both to their doctors as well as their employers, consider their rights to have their workplace exposures modified as needed, and this can include things from physical activity such as pushing or carrying things, standing for a long time, stress levels, as well as some of the toxics issues, exposure to chemicals and x-rays and that sort of thing. So again, making sure that this is part of the sorts of questions and discussions that we have with prospective parents, and I would say not just the moms but also the dads. The preconception exposures in the workplace can be quite important. So great sources of information, and this is just repeated from the Best Start website, the Mother Risk Helpline, your local public health unit, Workers Health and Safety Center, and Oh Mama are some great places to start. So I'm now going to pass it over to Lynn. Lynn is a public health nurse and has had years of experience and wonderful creativity in the way that she's been working on children's environmental health issues in prenatal and family health. So I will pass it over to her to share with you some of the reflections on this work and how to make it workable both for yourself and for the people that you're working with.
So hello everyone. Can everybody hear me okay, Louise?
Yes, we can hear you. It's a little bit echoey. If you can get it even a little closer to the speakerphone, that might help a little bit. Thanks, Lynn.
So yes, as Erica mentioned, I've been working as a public health nurse for quite a few years, and I've come across a lot of different scenarios. And a lot of times when even though I've been doing this for 10 years in children's environmental health, it just seems that we cannot create awareness enough around this topic area. Just last week I was at the Anishinaabe Health Conference doing a presentation with Linda Banning, and after our presentation, someone came up just with I guess an expression of shock on her face and said, "What's this about the antibacterials? I thought antibacterials were good for us. Now I'm hearing that we shouldn't be using them." And so again, I used that opportunity to have a conversation with her really quickly to talk about, you know, the do's and don'ts of why it's important to avoid antibacterials. And at the same time, something really easy I told her that you could do is just essentially don't buy anything that says antibacterials or microban, that sort of thing. So again, when service providers hear the information for the first time, the reaction is often personal as well too, and they need some time to internalize it before using it professionally. Everyone's always really busy, and so we need strategies for building in new information. And a lot of times there's challenges in terms of high literacy or technical terms, and so how do we kind of get around that? And just like as Erica mentioned, you don't need to know about all the technicalities or be a total expert. I still don't have all the expertise, and I've been working at it for 10 years. And what's interesting is that, you know, although we hear sometimes that people say, you know, I had for example, I was at a school and we're having a health fair. We had a booth there, and we were just had a whole bunch of little grab bag props there, and one lady came by and said, "Oh, I know all about recycling. I know all about being green." And so we further kept talking with her, and she says, "Yeah, I use all our margarine containers, and we've decided in order to protect the environment, we've decided to use those containers and put the kids' food in there and use those containers and microwave their food in the microwave and heat it up. So we're kind of reusing those containers." And so this is a perfect example of where sometimes, you know, it might appear that that person knew that it was a healthy thing or a green thing to do, which is a great green thing to do, but it's not so much an environmentally healthy thing to do for ourselves. And so, you know, we don't want to be jeopardizing our health as a result. So we're always making sure that it's not just good for the environment, but it's also good for our health. I've also had another example where I had one of the messages is never to compost dryer lint because of the traces of chemicals that are found in dryer lint. And so I had one time a little old lady say to me, "Oh, I use this for my to give it to the birds. I throw the dryer lint out. It's good for the environment, and my birds use it to make their nests." And all I could think of was these poor little birds just sort of choking on the dryer lint as they're making their nests. But at the same time, if we're composting that, you know, that's going back into the soil. And so there's, you know, a lot of times you'll see that you can compost dryer lint, but in fact, it's not really the best thing to do. And also, challenges for service providers too is we need some bite-sized pieces and strategies that are relevant and sensitive to clients' needs. And so what I found with the Top 5 Tips video is no matter where I present, who I present it to, what age, it doesn't matter. That video is just so versatile. It can be used, you know, with anyone, and it's very easy, straight to the point, and it doesn't matter what your level of comfort is in speaking about that topic. It's a very useful video. And also, other things that you can do too is even take some of those bite-sized pieces of each of those tips, like Eric was talking about, you know, the bust that dust, get drastic with plastic. You can actually take those chunks and put them as like social media ads, for example. In terms of challenges for parents and families, you know, yeah, sometimes the reactions is fear of guilt, you know, what I've done to my kids when they hear the information. I know I had that same experience personally when I heard it for the first time. But I think that the most important thing to tell parents is you have the information now. Don't look back at what you might have done, what could have been, what you should have maybe done. But now that you have the information, now's the time to start making, you know, some of those small changes. Some solutions cost more. There seems to be a perception that that's the case, but in fact it's not. You know, you can, well, I'll talk about that in just a sec. Some issues are embarrassing, so there might be times where you want to talk to your families about, but they're not opening up as much because maybe they're too embarrassed to talk about what's in the home because they might have, you know, a pest problem, those sorts of things. And then if children are present, it can be distracting, and if it's not supported by others at home, the change can be difficult to implement. So in terms of strategies that work, experiences from the service providers and parents, we try to deliver the information in a way that makes participants know that it's important not to look back, like I said before, and make those gradual changes. In terms of managing it, you know, make sure you tell them, let's do one thing at a time, like one step per month, or it means 12 per year. Personalize it, so using examples of change. So when I usually talk about, I started using baking soda to clean my kitchen sink, and then I went on to cleaning other sinks once I got used to doing that. And then I tried vinegar and water, you know, on my floors, and so talking to them about that. In terms of allowing a lot of time for lots of discussions and interaction, you know, if you're, I'm just thinking, for example, if you work in the field of healthy babies, healthy children, and you do a home visit, you know, show the video maybe one tip at a time. Have a discussion about plastics, for example, when you're talking about the drastic with plastic tip. Maybe just, you know, get the kids to go into the cupboards and find some of the pots and pans and the plastics, and then have a conversation about what they actually have in the home, that sort of thing. You could even like suggest, like next time they're at the thrift store, they might want to purchase something that's made out of glass instead of plastic. Or maybe they're in the grocery store and instead of purchasing, you know, a canned spaghetti sauce, look for a glass spaghetti jar, and then you can reuse that spaghetti jar as well too. And so in terms of low cost, no cost option, we've presented to public health nurses that work with families, and that's usually the number one question, like, you know, this is great, but if it's going to cost too much, what are we going to do? You know, they're not going to change. And actually, it can actually be cost saving, because if you think, sometimes, you know, you have families, or I even have a friend who has air fresheners everywhere in her home. And so if you say, you know, there's no need to be purchasing air fresheners in the home, there's other things that you can do, you know, they're saving money because they're not spending all that money on purchasing air fresheners. And at the same time, my friend actually just recently moved into a new home, and she was having some trouble with her asthma, and lo and behold, it was because she had purchased these really fancy air fresheners from, you know, a candle party, and you know, that's what was causing the issues. And so she kind of removed them, and you know, she sort of felt better now. And then describe low risk, medium risk, high risk frameworks. So, you know, saying that if you have a glass container, using that as lower risk. A safer plastic would be your medium risk. And like a plastic, for example, that's got vinyl, microwaving in plastic, or using nasty plastics is probably would be your higher risk. So working with higher risk groups, for example, rely on the food banks. It's pretty hard to just say, you know, eat organic fruits and veggies when I'm talking about the balancing act here. It's not realistic for them. They're probably eating, you know, mainly canned fruits and veggies. But how you can sort of put that into a perspective where it's more relatable to them, you can say, you know, whenever possible, try buying fresh or frozen. But if you can't, make sure that the canned food, you're not, heating that up on a stovetop or at the campfire, because the cans are lined with BPA. And so, there's always putting the risks in perspective to help them out. In terms of making it memorable, CPCHE has a lot of different grab bag activities and a lot of different resources. And so just an example of how you can really get creative and you're not limited, you're just limited to your imagination, actually, is a few years back I made some grab bags for some of our public health nurses, for some of our community partners. And I actually had a box at work saying, I need the following, give me all your old plastic containers you've got. I had, pots and pans, and so they donated a lot of that, put it in a box, and then whatever else I needed for props that was, kind of mentioned in the grab bag, I went and purchased. And so, it was actually a good way of using some of the items that may end up in the garbage as grab bag items. And then also consider doing a children's environmental health booth at an event. We've shown the top 5 tips video. We've added some props from the grab bag, like shower curtains, a bag with dryer lint and air fresheners. And we had like cue cards along the items so people could read. But what's really interesting is this topic, more so than any other topic that I've done in the past, and I've even had at events, people will kind of like go by your booth, just like they're going to not even look at you. And then I found that even though having those props, they'll sort of do a double take, kind of take a few steps back, and they're hooked. They come over and they start talking, and they're like, why do you have this dryer lint here? And so it's really, really interesting how it generates a lot of discussion. And this kind of happens over and over again, so it's really interesting to see. So again, I'm just going to finish here with some other available tools and strategies. Check out the resources listed in the key messages. CPCHE's got some materials, that useful handouts that she's talked about, Erica, already, and the environmental working group as well, as long as Health Canada. So back over to you, Erica.
Thanks, Lynn. This was great. Yeah. Okay, we'll go back to Erica. Thank you.
Yeah, Lynn and I used to do a lot of training sessions for service providers, and doing the grab bag is actually a lot of fun, sort of passing around an item and saying, I wonder why we have this shower curtain, and, starting a conversation from an object that people are able to hold in their hands makes it much more memorable and engaging. So we've mentioned, Lynn was referencing the video, and I see in the chat box, Louise, thank you for providing the link. So this is referring to the top 5 tips video and supporting print resources that we did about 5 years ago. And really we were responding to some of the things that even folks on this call were saying, I don't have the expertise, I don't know how to boil this down into plain language. So we tried to do some of that work, and we worked for about a year with frontline workers. Lynn and a whole bunch of other folks were on our steering committee, really trying to build the resource that people would end up using, because they were the ones who knew what they needed in their home visits, in their prenatal classes, and so forth. So, again, responding to parents' increasing concern and seeking advice, service providers realizing that maybe it's time to incorporate this into some of our core messaging, but not really sure how to go about it, and wanting to create something that was just a plug-in, that you don't need to do some training or go take a public health class or whatever. You can literally just plug it in. So what we ended up with was this video. And in modern terms, a 13-minute video sounds pretty long, but we were not really intending it to be, a viral video like competing with the cute cat videos on YouTube, but instead something that people would use as part of their curriculum and as part of their day-to-day practice. The supporting brochure, the image up there to the right at the top, we have that translated into 7 languages in response to people's requests to work with different communities. And then the tip cards, which we've already had a peek at, those are available in English and French. So Louise has put the links down below. They're also on the website, and we can make those available. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on this just to sort of reinforce the message that there are sort of off-the-shelf resources that you can literally plug and play. I got a call last week from a lovely public health professional in New Brunswick who was saying, oh, we use your video, I hope it's okay, but we load it onto the iPads and send it out with the public health nurses when they're doing their home visits, and I was delighted to hear that people are using that resources, adapting it to their use. This is some of the feedback that we got when we were back at the pilot stage, you know, parents and guardians feeling that it was helpful, that they could understand it, that you know it was culturally acceptable. There was nothing in there that made them cringe. Service providers also felt that it was a good video, easy and clear to follow. Most of them saying that they would want to use it again. We've heard anecdotally that people's kids really like it. You have kids running around the house for the next few weeks talking about bust that dust. So sort of, you know, it's an animated style and pretty easy to watch for any age group. I had hoped to show you a little clip, but we decided not to challenge the limits of technology. But I do encourage you to just click on our website, or even if you just go to YouTube and type in CPCHE Top 5 Tips, it'll be the first thing that comes up. It's in English and French, and thanks to Lynn's work with the Anishinaabe Nation, we had a request to translate it into a First Nations language, so it's also available with or without subtitles as well, so you could have it showing in a waiting room, for example, without the sound playing. Another couple of examples, and again specifically to the needs of Indigenous people, this is work from Lynn Soramaki and her colleague Linda Banning in the Anishinaabe Nation, formerly the Union of Ontario Indians. Two resources, and I think, Lynn, we have time, I think, if you wanted to just say a couple of words about this resource and the way that you're using it with families.
Yeah, it's so I'm just going to start talking about the Caring for Mother Earth project, and as Erica mentioned, it's a collaboration with Anishinaabe Nation and the Thunder Bay District Health Unit. And essentially, this is a project that aims to engage service providers, parents, the general public on the topics of FASD prevention, children's environmental health, maternal and child health, and we integrate cultural teachings using the medicine wheel as a framework and the 7 grandfather teachings as our guiding principles. And so this project provides an opportunity to create a cultural awareness and sensitivity as well that we found doing this. And so our 4 workshops can be delivered to both Indigenous and mainstream participants on and off reserve, and we can tailor them to any groups, age groups, male or female. Our 4 workshops that we have created under this project is we have a parenting seed planting, a personal care product, a feast bundle / grandmother bag workshop, and a stepping stones workshop, which is our new workshop. And each of these workshops represents one of the elements of our in the medicine wheel. And so this is a picture of our very first resources that we collaborated on. It's the checklist, and it was actually launched to the day of the Idle No More movement in December 2012. So it just celebrated its 5th year, and the vision of the Idle No More movement, just as a backgrounder, revolves around First Nations reclaiming their role as caretakers of Mother Earth and all of creation for future generations. And so it's just really interesting. It's been a great project. It's near and dear to my heart. And it's been very successful. We've had many communities that have participated. I think we were doing, the tally was like over 600 participants. We've just presented the project last week at the Anishinaabe Health Conference. We were at the Ontario Public Health Conference last March, and we've gone to Vancouver to present, and you know, it's sort of been promoted as well through CPCHE's webinars. But what's really interesting is we actually integrate the top 5 tips video into the workshops that we do. And so when I say that the video is applicable to any age any participants, it's true. And I have one little cute little example where we were in one of the First Nations communities, and Linda had forgotten her PowerPoint projector, so we had a little laptop, and we were showing the video, and we had about 12 little kids all huddled around by the video or the laptop, and after they finished watching the video, we were wondering, well, I wonder if they even got it, right? And so we asked them, so did you remember anything about the top 5 tips video? And the smallest little guy, who was like age 5, says, bust that dust. And so it was really cute to hear that he had sort of retained some of that information and stuff. But it's been a really great project. If you want more information, feel free to contact me.
Thanks so much, Lynn. So we are wrapping up. Just a couple of closing thoughts from my side, and then we'll have some time for discussion. Certainly as we're working on these issues, we're trying to work with individuals to reduce exposures, but there's a bigger picture here, of course, that we have a policy framework that is perhaps not protective enough in terms of exposure to toxins. Service providers have a role in policy advocacy as well as in that frontline work in terms of equipping and empowering people to make informed choices. And certainly as parents and families, we can do practical everyday actions and also use our voice to call for better protection. So just wanting to put our work into context that we cannot, as one of my colleagues like to say, we can't shop our way out of this problem. So thinking about ways that our work as professionals in terms of advocating for protection and children's environmental health measures, but also as we're talking, each prospective parent or family that we're talking to, we're starting to increase that public awareness, that sensitivity, and hopefully that mobilization of support for wiser decision making in terms of the sorts of chemicals that we allow into our environments and into our day-to-day products. And then the final point, and this is again along the lines of, keep it simple, keep it practical, and just think about precaution. I think, almost all of the public health and environmental laws start with precaution as part of their preambulatory language, recognizing that science is evolving. We can't know everything, but when the end of the day, we want to know that we were erring on the side of safety, and certainly this is a message that resonates with parents. As parents, we want to put the health of our kids first, and that we would rather be safe than sorry. So using that as a simple rule to help guide decision making. If something feels like it might be a higher risk, then try to shift towards the lower risk, as Lynn was pointing out. And again, thinking about ways that we can look towards societal change as well. So I thank you very much for your attention, for both Lynn and for me. And we're now going to pass it back to Louise, I believe, to moderate the discussion section.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. This was very, very interesting. And I've increased the chat box. I know it's not the best format to be able to ask questions, but it would be great if you have a few questions. I think you've got two great experts, with Lynn having done a lot of prenatal education and knowing a lot about environment, and Erica being such an expert on the environmental issues and young children and pregnant women. So this is a good time to ask your questions to them. So you can just type them in the chat box, and they will be able to answer them. We've got the 2 microphones open. So and while people are typing their questions, I'll let you know that we did record this webinar, and give me about half an hour after the webinar, I will send you the recording so you can share it with other people, and at the same time I'll send you an evaluation link to the webinar. And if the technology works well, as I close the webinar, you will actually be receiving a link to the evaluation survey. Evaluations are very important to us and to our funders, so I would really appreciate if you could take a few minutes to fill it and let us know, what other topics might be of interest for another round. We do have 2 more webinars in English left, one on active living and one on abuse, and they're actually full now, so they're both in February, but if you didn't have a chance to register, they will also be recorded. And tomorrow this presentation will be done by Lynn in French. So I do see a little question here that's probably pretty straightforward for you to answer.
Yes,
Erica?
yes, thank you. So responding to Chelsea's question about ordering the tip cards. So CPCHE has shifted. We used to have a distribution house and an order form online. Because of resource constraints, we are no longer doing that. But the good news is that we do have quite a stock still available. And if you want to just email me, we can be in touch. We're happy to provide the remaining stock free of charge, provided that the recipient is able to cover the shipping. We don't have a budget to cover the shipping, but if your organization could pick up the tab for getting them sent to you, we're happy to provide inventory for your use. The other thing is we have moved towards putting PDFs of everything online with the idea that people could also just simply print. So anything that you find, the fact sheets, the tip cards are a special size, but you can actually print them 3 to a page and then cut them. They're not quite as nice as the ones that are on cardstock that we have in inventory, but really trying to make things available so that you can access them within budget.
Yeah, and probably PDFs can be shared on social media also fairly easily, just cut and pasting the image, because they're pretty small tip cards too. Were you going to say something, Lynn?
So I will. I'm just going to type in my email address in case people didn't catch it from the intro slide.
Oh, that's a great idea. Any other questions to wrap up this presentation? A couple of people typing, so we'll give them a minute to put that in. And in the meantime, I really appreciate your participation. All our 4 English webinars filled up to 100 in very little time, so that's always nice to see that there's interest for these topics. So thank you, Erica, for providing your email address. Okay, the medicine wheel that was presented, I guess that would be more a question for Lynn to answer. Lynn, I don't know if you're muted or what's happening, but we cannot hear you at this point. And the way I'm set up, I cannot see who's muted and who's not muted.
Sorry, while we're waiting for Lynn to respond about the medicine wheel, and I'm trying to remember whether we have it linked on the CPCHE website, but someone has pointed out that some of the information on the CPCHE website is very dated, and I wholeheartedly agree. So specifically a query about cell phone and Wi-Fi use. This is a topic that we haven't dug in too deeply on, not for lack of discussing it among the partners, but we operate on 100% consensus, and some of the partners have more or less precautionary messaging on cell phone use. So, we had been relying on Toronto Public Health, one of the core CPCHE partners, for their messaging. There have been certainly some developments in that area. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classifying cell phones as, I think it's class B, probable carcinogen with respect to a specific type of brain cancer related to prolonged use. Certainly we get a lot of questions about things like Wi-Fi, which is ubiquitous not just in homes but also increasingly in schools. So I'm unfortunately not able to provide you a CPCHE reference or so forth, but in terms of my own advice that I share in my personal life, again, not necessarily speaking as CPCHE, certainly trying to reduce exposures. I think it's clear that cell phone use, we want to minimize it and not do things like hold the cell phone right against your head, don't carry it around in your pocket. Those sorts of things I think are well established practice. For pregnant moms, of course, not having the cell phone on your person, specifically near the womb. And then Wi-Fi as well, that one is more emergent, but again, thinking about ways to keep a distance from Wi-Fi routers and reduce exposure where you can.
Thanks for that information. And Lynn, sorry you were muted, but now you're unmuted, so if you could respond to that question about the medicine wheel, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, so the picture of the medicine wheel that was on there is part of our checklist. And it's available for download at the Anishinaabe Nation website, or formerly Union of Ontario Indians. And so it's all in PDF. And if you are having difficulty trying to download it, just get in touch with me. Yeah, and there's also a medicine wheel activity that we do in some of our workshops, and that's found on the CPCHE website as well too. But if you want to reach me, my phone number is 625-8823, area code 807.
Thank you very much. You're very generous, Lynn, with that. Thank you. Any other questions?
I actually have a question. This is Erica. One of the things that we've come across and have paid some attention to most recently is the vanity ultrasounds that are increasingly offered as kind of a memento, or let's get ultrasounds of babies frequently throughout throughout gestation, including the 3D ultrasounds. And I'm just wondering if that's coming up for people. I don't know if anyone's had any direct experience with that or with advising pregnant moms or prospective parents about that. We've just written a letter to the Baby Time show because they were having booths offering this, just advising them that this is probably not.
So what would be the advice you would give to service providers if that comes up in a class? Or
well, simple avoidance. I mean, this is it's a diagnostic, it's a medical diagnostic tool, not meant for souvenirs. That it's something to take seriously, and like other things, you want to do it only when necessary. That it isn't actually, in terms of a shower gift or whatever. It's and this is also relying on Health Canada's assessment of it as well. They are also discouraging unnecessary ultrasound.
Thank you very much for that information. I'm not sure if there are many more questions. I do see a couple people typing, so maybe I'll give them a chance to finish typing. I think this was our last slide of the presentation. Oh no, yeah, there are more acknowledgements and thank you. So you can read that while the questions are being typed. If anybody wants to download the files, this is your last chance to do so also. As I said, I will be sending a link, and you do have the PDF of the whole presentation also if you need to refer to something that went by a little fast. So on another webinar idea, use of ultrasound in pregnancy. Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I get the impression it is pretty much it for questions. So thank you very much to our great presenter, Erica and Lynn. And thank you for all the participants who had great information to share and interactions. Thank you very much. And as I close this meeting, you should be receiving a link to the evaluation.
Thanks so much, Louise. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.